Hello. It's great to be here with John Dean. I was recalling coming in here today at these studios, which are on Capitol Hill, that it was 39 summers ago when you held the country and the world mesmerized with 4 days of sworn testimony before the Senate Watergate Committee. And there's really been no news story like that since. And one of the things that happened when the secret taping system was disclosed in the Nixon offices and phones, which you didn't know about, and then
suspected.
You suspected, but you did not know
No.
at all. You had no confidence. And then those tapes came out, and they vindicated almost 100% exactly what you said. There was an anchor I ran into, one of the TV anchors, who reminded me he was 6 years old when you testified. And I think so we need, for those who weren't around, first thing I would ask is, what was Watergate?
Well, I suspect at this table there's probably more collective knowledge between you and I on that subject than any table could ever be set to address the matter. You and I know that subject well. You know it from your reporting. I know it from living it and then taking a second look, a third look, and a fourth look in study. Watergate is defined in most dictionaries of abuse of high power occurring during the Nixon presidency for political purposes. Now, you and I know that's a pretty weak definition of a rather sad chapter in American history. It was a period that America did not shine its brightest. The presidency showed its underbelly, and to this day, the legacy of those events affect the way we govern.
But Watergate itself, Sam Ervin, who headed the Senate Watergate Committee, said what it was an assault on the integrity of the process of nominating presidents and electing them. In other words, that Nixon and his people were tampering with everyone's vote in a way. Do you agree?
I agree with that, Bob, but what's happened is, over the years, the definition of Watergate has so expanded from the break-in, the cover-up, the interference and influencing of election process, to just general Nixonian abuse of power. In fact, Congress has actually defined it as a result of legislation and regulations that filled that legislation, that today Watergate has a very, very broad meaning. You and I, and today we're going to be talking about a very narrow area of that, but it's indicative of the entire events that fall under the investigation.
So why 39, 40 years later, because it's 40 years ago that Nixon resigned,
Right.
Why have you jumped back into a total immersion in that period of the tapes for that year, from the time of the Watergate burglary until their existence was disclosed by Alexander Butterfield? Why have you done this book?
Why did I do that? Well, you know, if I had known what I was getting into, I don't think I would have gotten into it. I started out, my publisher suggested I might revisit that subject in light of the 40th anniversary of Watergate. That's a rolling anniversary, as you know, that goes from June 17th of 2012 till August 9 of 2014, which is the period between the break-in and the arrests and Nixon's resignation. So I originally started out, and what I wanted to answer was a question of, how could somebody as savvy as Richard Nixon, politically very, very astute and intelligent, mess up his presidency on the bungled burglary that provoked it all the way he did? And that's what I set out to answer. I assumed in doing so that much of the answer would be found in existing tapes. I had no knowledge until I started cataloging who had taped what and what was available. That only
and there are hundreds of hours of tapes that no one really has listened to or transcribed.
I found over 600 conversations that, as best I can tell, nobody outside the archives in processing the tapes ever looked at.
Okay, what did you learn? Somebody who reads this book, what are they going to learn that they didn't know?
There's probably every page has something I didn't know. I don't know how many pages had things you didn't know, but we're pretty sophisticated readers and knowledgeable about this. I didn't know, for example, that Richard Nixon was, just to take it kind of sequentially, at the outset was only getting his knowledge and information from Haldeman initially, then Ehrlichman, his chief of staff, Bob Haldeman, his top domestic advisor and former White House counsel, John Ehrlichman, and your reporting in the Washington Post, as well as others. But because the Post is the only paper that's covering it.
It struck me as, I mean, time and time again, he says he read those articles and he's angry about them. He wonders how information is getting out.
Did you always wonder how he felt about that before?
Well, of course.
And
yes.
now you know.
Yeah, and he keeps, he said, oh, that's a story in the Post. Where's that going? Is that coming from here? Is that coming from the committee to reelect? Is it coming from the FBI and so forth? Just to step back for somebody, I mean, what do we learn about Nixon that we didn't know? Because we knew about the criminality, we knew about the abuse of power, we knew about the kind of the small-mindedness that everything seemed to be about Nixon. What is added here?
What I did, as you know, is I follow it day by day to try to understand how this thing fell apart. And if I pull away to a wide angle, I see a combination of two things: character, the man's character, and his disposition. He had no hesitation to break the law. He had no hesitation to pretty much do anything he thought might be a solution to a problem. Very expedient. But the most striking thing is his decision-making is so sloppy, so unprocessed, so seat of the pants. I was stunned. Bob, I can't but wonder if this doesn't reflect other areas of his presidency. He knows when he's making these decisions, they're important, particularly as it progresses. Now, how much of this pattern we see here, which I've dug out in some detail, is true of Vietnam, of
these
China.
These meetings go on about Watergate with his top aides, Haldeman, Ehrlichman, you to a certain extent. They are rambling, they are unfocused.
And I've tightened them.
And there is no kind of, let's march through this and let's make a decision. And he will just say something almost at random. And then Haldeman will say something. I mean, at one point
and he'll come back 30 minutes later, have the same conversation with somebody else, if not the same person.
And say contradictory things.
Exactly.
And at one point you call it, I love the metaphor, you say it was as a participant, you as his counsel at the time, not in the inner circle, but you say this was the devil's merry-go-round. What did you mean by that?
Well, that was actually a metaphor I picked up as I was writing. I'd thought about this. I thought about the circular nature of the Watergate conversations and how the same tune and the same circle repeated, sometimes a slight difference, but basically over and over. But the man with the lever is sitting there right in the middle as Richard Nixon, and he never pulls it. And that's why I said this is the devil's merry-go-round, because these conversations were not at a very high level of conversation. This isn't deep thought. This is pretty expedient thinking.
As I went through it, and there were a good number of things I learned, and one was about Chuck Colson, who was Nixon's kind of hatchet man, his special counsel, somebody who was always hanging in the shadows. And
I tried not to be pejorative in calling him special projects.
Okay, but he had his reputation,
but he did.
And he eventually pled guilty to related crimes, and I think did 7 months in jail. Right. And a fascinating moment, Carl Bernstein and I wrote a story on October 10th in the Post saying that Watergate was part of a larger operation of sabotage and espionage, bringing forth the details about Donald Segretti, who was this lawyer who was hired to run all kinds of agents, a against Nixon's opponents in the primaries and so forth. And then Colson comes in and says, it's absolutely fascinating. He said, I did a hell of a lot of things on the outside, and you never read about it. The things you read about were